Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the 5th Annual Urban Agriculture Symposium. The purpose of the symposium is to showcase a sampling of programs and projects made possible by the Urban Agricultural Conservation Grants, funded through the generous support of the Natural Resources Conservation Service. To date, 102 grants totaling more than $4.6 million have been awarded. And in many districts, the grants provided the critical funding for district staff to deliver conservation technical assistance to a diverse group of previously underserved communities. And in an effort to sustain the program, conservation districts and partners leveraged millions in local resources. And in just the first 3 years, $3.7 million in grants have been matched with $4.9 million in local resources. And for those districts interested in the 2021 grants, proposals will be accepted until February 15th for the 2021 Urban Agricultural Conservation Grants, and the RFP can be viewed at the NACD webpage. And before I introduce this afternoon's presenters, let's cover a few logistical details. All of the presentations have been pre-recorded. The presenters are online live, monitoring the chat box, and will attempt to answer questions in real time. I will introduce all the presenters as we start the symposium. Their bios and links to their districts will be available in the chat box. The symposium can be viewed after the annual meeting via Gizmo platform until February 21st. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenters in the order they will present. We will then move between each presentation, followed by a panel discussion with the speakers facilitated by Ariel, the NACD Pacific Region representative. We will start with Alyson Aquino. Alyson is District Conservation for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, covering Alameda County in the San Francisco Bay of California. She's been working for Nrcs in the East Bay for the last 12 years, supporting a variety of agriculture through voluntary conservation programs. We will then hear from Kim Lynch and Steve Darcey from the Prince George's Soil Conservation District in Maryland. Kim Lynch is the Urban Agriculture Conservation Planner for the district, where she assists urban farmers in designing and implementing best management practices to improve soil health and water quality. In addition to conservation planning, she coordinates the county's Envirothon competition, chairs the Prince George's County's Public Schools Environment, Agriculture, and Natural Resources Program Advisory Committee, and actively participates in both the Prince George's Food Equity Council and the Food Security Task Force. Steve is a fourth-generation Prince George's County farmer. He has extensive knowledge in commodity crops, hay production, and raising livestock. He is also an NACD soil health champion and has grown a successful on-farm business creating quality compost from horse stable waste. He has worked with the Prince George's Soil Conservation District since 1986 as the soil conservation engineer and became the executive director in 2013, where he manages the soil and water conservation programs for the district, including rural agriculture conservation, urban agricultural conservation, urban development and conservation program, the agricultural land preservation programs, and a variety of outreach and education programs such as the Green School Initiative. He is also a member of the Governor's Patuxent River Commission, Maryland's Secretary of Agriculture's Soil Health Advisory Committee, the county's Agricultural Resource Advisory Committee, and the Maryland Secretary of Environment's Climate Change Mitigation Work Group. And finally, we will hear a presentation from the Muskegon County Soil and Water Conservation District in Ohio, given by the 2020 summer interns, Allie and Ben Phillips. Allie is a senior in environmental sciences at Muskegon College, and Ben is a sophomore at the Ohio State University in environmental sciences. And now we'll move to the presentations, and I'd like Alyson, it's all yours.
Hi everyone, I'm Alyson Aquino. I'm the District Conservationist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service in Alameda County, which is in the east part of the San Francisco Bay. I'm going to talk to you today about our NRCS programs as far as our support for urban agriculture, specifically in Alameda County. I have my talk today broken up into 4 parts. So just going over a general introduction to NRCS and some of our local partners, specifically the Alameda County Resource Conservation District, who is our primary local partner. I'll give you 4 examples of some NRCS projects we've done on urban farms, 2 that were successful and a couple that were not quite as successful. We'll go over kind of an overall summary of some of our urban farming strategies, how we've been able to support them well, and some other things that haven't worked so great. And then finish it up with just some future considerations, some ideas for maybe some folks who are listening to run with based on our experiences here. So in my office, we function as a conservation partnership, the NRCS and the Alameda County Resource Conservation District. Our NRCS office has 4 positions. Mine as a supervisor, we have a range specialist, a biologist, and an engineer. So we don't really have anyone that has a farming background. So a lot of these resource considerations and things are fairly new to us. Our RCD, on the other hand, has a variety of technical staff, and they've had a dedicated urban ag small farm position for about 8 or 9 years now, which has been very valuable. Together, we really coordinate on outreach for our various programs, support each other. The RCD brings grant funding for some of the things NRCS can't do. And of course, NRCS, we have our Farm Bill programs as our primary way to support urban agriculture. We work a lot with UC Cooperative Extension, some local jurisdictions, cities and counties, some utility companies, which are often the landowners of some of the urban farms that we work with, nonprofits and other community groups. So NRCS has a real tradition of supporting kind of that larger scale agriculture, or that traditional type of farming, looking at erosion issues, irrigation, water saving types of projects. We do a lot in California with air quality programs, replacing on-farm equipment like tractors for air quality reasons, and just some basic types of farming practices like cover crop. Our primary Farm Bill program that we use in California is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. It's a financial incentives program for farmers, ranchers, anyone in agriculture to voluntarily adopt new conservation practices and receive an incentive payment, a portion of the cost it takes for them to do that through our programs. To be eligible for EQIP, if you're not an individual, if you're a business or a nonprofit of some type, you have to have formal organizational documents so we can document signature authority. You have to have a bank account. Our payments are done through direct deposit. And if it's a leased property, you need written permission from the landowner to install any kind of structural practices, even vegetative practices like cover crops or a hedgerow. The timeline for our program is typically a year, if not more, from when we first start talking to someone, really discuss the issues that they want to address through our program, put in an application, get it funded, and go through all of that paperwork. So the timeline for the EQIP program is typically about a year. And all the payments, any of the things that we include in those applications or contracts have to have a natural resource benefit to them. So a lot of times that's not ideal for new farms because they haven't really established things to a point where they know what the resource issues are. So there's really nothing to address. It can be a bit of a catch. In the Bay Area, our version of urban ag is often on leased property. I don't think we've actually worked on any farms that the people that came to us were the owners of it. It's typically leased. Much smaller scale than our traditional agriculture. They can be a residential lot that just hasn't been built on yet, vacant lots around a city. We have some land that's in industrial areas, so adjacent to industrial buildings or where a building was. Typically multiple crop types, not really a single cropping type of system, and we rarely see orchards, and I think that's typically because of because they're more of a permanent crop, and these properties are typically leased. We have some non-traditional farming issues with our urban ag, as you probably see yourself. And vandalism can be a problem, so good fencing is something that people are looking for to keep folks out or to steal any of the equipment, things like a complex irrigation system. We have issues with soil contamination because a lot of these farms are in areas where they're industrial or have some type of contamination from previous land use. We see a lot of staffing turnover with the farms that we work with, so both in the folks that are out there working and also in the management. And a lot of them have an educational component to them. So not even just a school garden, but some of the local farms will have some type of community education, student education, or adult education associated with it. We typically see raised beds, not a lot of planting right into the ground. The water source is usually domestic water. Some of these farms are really well managed and profitable. They can sell to some of the higher end restaurants, farmers markets, and some are struggling financially. A lot of the requests we get for funding are associated with just the basic materials needed for the farm to function. So seeding, compost, wood chips, farm equipment. And folks come to us sometimes also for land access. So people looking for a new area to farm or some existing farms looking to expand. So the first example project I wanted to share with you today is a hillside farm in San Leandro. It's just about 2 acres. It's a piece of land that is right behind the juvenile hall. The crops are on the hillside. They took this over recently and put some crops in this area. There's a small orchard to the right of this photo that when they first contacted us in about 2014, they said they were going to replant that orchard. But they had contacted us, kind of a typical conversation, to come out to the property, see what they have going on, and see what type of programs we have that might be able to support them. So obviously they're cropping on this hillside. We talked to them about some slope stabilization options. They were having a little bit of erosion, establishing some habitat for native pollinators and beneficial insects. As you can see, there's not a lot of natural habitat around that might encourage more pollinators on the farm. We talked to them a little bit about some irrigation management. We never really took any action. We did the visit, we talked to them, but it didn't really seem like our program priorities really matched up with what they were looking for. Like a lot of urban ag in our area, they were more kind of looking at staffing, increasing production, utilizing the land as much as possible. They have an educational component with their farm. So those are the things that were really, on the front of their minds as far as what they needed to concentrate on as they got this off the ground. So we didn't work with them because the natural resource aspects just weren't really a priority at the time. Several years later, we got a call from them again. They had changed operational managers. So we sort of started from scratch from the second person. We went back out and had a lot of the same conversations. But again, our programs really didn't line up with them. So not a real successful project, but there was a take-home message from it that I think it's really important as we work with people to put in writing what type of conversations we had, what kind of recommendations we have, so they have a hard copy of something so that as staff changes, as management changes, they can utilize that as a resource moving forward. The second example project I wanted to show you was a farm in Oakland. It's a really well-run operation. They really have it dialed in. We went out, they had called us and said, what kind of programs do you have that might be able to support us? We went out, saw what they had going on. And the most obvious thing that matched up between what their priorities were and what our programs, our Farm Bill programs can support is they wanted to put in a windbreak. One of the parts of this location is right underneath the freeway overpass. And so the windbreak would be a visual barrier, possibly a pollution type of barrier. So we were pretty excited we had found something that might work. As we got into it deeper, we found out that they are funding for the windbreak that they had already had sort of in the front of their minds. They needed to do it in the next few months or the funding was going to go away. So again, that doesn't really line up with NRCS programs too well. We don't have the option to pay on things retroactively. So we never ended up working with this particular location, this particular farm, because the timing for our farm bill programs didn't line up with the pace that they were going with on their priorities. So one of the more successful projects is this community farm in Hayward. It's about 5 acres, so one of the larger properties we've worked on. It's owned by a large utility company. It's leased to the city, and then the city in turn was subletting it to a nonprofit. It's about 100 or more farmers on site, each with these individual plots. There's a lot of different ethnicities, a lot of different languages being spoken, and a lot of people who were growing crops that were more traditional to their country of origin. They had, one of our first conversations was to talk about education for the farmers as far as irrigation water management went. A lot of the people lived in that community and would come over, do some work in their plot, turn the irrigation water on, go home for lunch, hang out for an hour or two and come back and turn the water off. So the crops were growing and getting all the water they needed, but because they were on city water, it was pretty expensive to not have a more rigorous system of irrigation water oversight and ability to see how much people were using and for them to get more familiar with what the real irrigation water needs are for the various crops. So as we got into that more, we decided that a new irrigation system would probably be beneficial for this whole operation, something more efficient, something that they could track and have a little bit more control over. So this was back in 2013. We signed them up for EQIP. We put the irrigation system in the application. They were funded. The system was finally installed in 2019, so about 6 years later, which is, you probably couldn't pull that off with EQIP anymore. We have a lot stricter guidelines on how long a contract can be, but we kept rescheduling this one and rescheduling it. It was just a lot of things to coordinate. Within those 6 years, there was a lot of different bids, a lot of different designs. The original nonprofit dissolved and some of the members created a new one. So we had to get all their new documents and they had to create a new bank account. So there's a lot of complexities to it, but in the end, they were able to install the new irrigation system in that location. The NRCS financial contributions for the system only ended up being about 1/10 of what they spent. So, but they were grateful for that, and it's operating now out there. So a little bit more of a successful collaboration with NRCS cost share programs. And the last example project I wanted to show you is a very small farm in Livermore. So not really an urban setting. Livermore is about, I think, 90,000 population, and this is in a residential area, but not really what we consider traditional urban location. But I wanted to mention it because some of the factors that are going on here really match up well with NRCS programs. So we just started working at this location. It's a couple, they lease the property. I believe it's about 1/2 acre. There's a house on it that they're living in, and they both have full-time jobs. So this is in addition to their regular full-time jobs. They're selling at the local farmers market, and they approached us for the same thing. What type of programs do you have? They're doing a great job. They've been farming for about a year, so they have enough time and experience with this location now to kind of know what they need. So we're going to work with them on some owl boxes, some hedgerows, some irrigation water management, and a high tunnel. And the NRCS programs really line up well for 2 reasons. One, the payment rates for the things that they would like to apply for funding are these sort of units. They're not a per acre payment where if you scale it down to the smaller size farm, it doesn't make as much sense financially. It's a owl box has a payment rate that's just per box. So it's going to be about the same for a large farm versus a small farm. The high tunnel is paid per square foot, so it's not going to cost a small farmer too much more out of pocket than it would a large farmer. Also, the timing for this particular farm is much better. They're not in a rush to do anything. Like I said, they work full time, so our year to a year and a half to 2 year type of funding timeline for all of the things they want to do is pretty realistic for them. So it's a good example of when things do match up. Additionally, our RCD here, the Alameda County RCD, has funding for carbon farm plans through a separate grant right now, and they are going to be doing a carbon farm plan for these farmers on top of the NRCS services. So they'll be getting some additional technical information from our office. So overall, some of the things that we found that have been a challenge have related to the Farm Bill programs. In addition to the things I've already discussed, sometimes our NRCS standards can be a little bit more complicated than what's feasible. For example, irrigation systems. So a lot of times these smaller farms, these urban farms have a more creative type of irrigation system versus traditional ag with the large pumps and the filters and the main line and all those types of things that our NRCS standards and specs require for payment. So it's not always a really easy thing to say, okay, well, here's funding for a new irrigation system, new drip line, all of those types of things, but you also have to meet these standards and specifications. It can be more complicated than it needs to be, so it might not be feasible for the farmers. NRCS payment rates can be too low sometimes. I mentioned in that last farm example, some of those more discrete types of conservation practices, like an owl box has sort of a standalone rate, but something like cover crop that's paid per acre, our payment rates are really based off of a larger scale operation. So when you scale it down to a 1 acre farm, we only pay on the area that's actually seeded with the cover crop. So right now, our payment rate for cover crop ranges from about $50 to $80 an acre for the most basic version. So you scale that down to half an acre, and it might not be worth the paperwork to get $25 to $40 for that to implement that practice through EQIP. We don't have a lot of extreme weather here, so high tunnel isn't really used too often, but sometimes it's not feasible because the NRCS standard requires that the crops are planted in the ground. And we don't always see that either because it's leased property or because of the soil conditions. Perhaps it's contaminated or just not ideal for planting. So they'll be in more of a box situation. So high tunnels can't be used for any kind of container plantings. Some things we've done that have worked as we have gained more experience with working with the different farms, we've really learned to listen to the whole picture of what their needs are. Funding for staff, equipment, materials. Conservation is a great goal, but it's often not a really high priority over the day-to-day functionality of some of these farms, especially those that are more financially strapped than others. We've learned to find Farm Bill options that work and to really promote those when we talk to people, not to get people too excited about the full range of financial assistance options, but to really highlight those that are going to be more feasible for most people. Practices where the payment rates make sense. Farms where the landowner, assuming it's leased, was more supportive of some of those structural practices, considering they do have to provide that landowner support, that landowner agreement at the beginning to say that they're okay with people putting these structural practices on their property. A couple other things that we've done that's outside the NRCS Farm Bill programs in collaboration with the Alameda County Resource Conservation District one is the mini grant program. So we're going on our 7th year right now of the mini grant program. It's funding that comes through our county clean water program, and it is administered by the Alameda County RCD. Once a year, they put out a request for applications, and any size community farm, school farm, any kind of urban ag can apply for small amounts of funding to do conservation practices that have a water quality benefit to them. We get about $20,000 a year to distribute to the selected applicants. So very small amount of money per applicant, but it's been pretty surprising of what they've been able to do with that money. I think it's been a very successful program. We've gotten a real variety of requests from some of the regular farms we had a request for, it was like a fourplex, like a multifamily housing, and they had an open area that they wanted to grow crops in and distribute to their community, to their neighbors. So a real variety of requests for different types of farming. The mini grant program has funded rainwater catchments, bioswales, barn owl boxes, soil testing, and pollinator plant establishment, just to name a few things. And then our RCD did receive an NACD grant, and that deliverables for that were pretty much 3 basic things. One was staff training on cultural awareness and racial equity issues. So both NRCS staff, NRCD staff, and some of our partners participated in those activities, which is really essential to any of our work in the urban areas. The RCD hired 2 additional staff people to serve as, to do technical work with the farmers. So to go out and just provide that technical assistance. The final total was 18 farms that they were able to provide technical assistance to, which is something, again, that we don't really have the staff capacity to, and staff knowledge to do. So that was extremely valuable. And then they did 3 workshops, vertebrate pest management, drip irrigation systems, and then the last one, because COVID had started, was a webinar on carbon planning and polyculture. Both the mini grant program and the NACD grant added a really different aspect to the type of support that we've been doing here. It really centered on building relationships with the community and laid the groundwork to have these authentic relationships, this authentic type of communication where NRCS and the RCD didn't really have that before to that extent. They weren't really these hard and fast deliverables. It was more about building up those working relationships with the community. Also gave us a chance to do some sort of self-reflection, self-assessment. The mini grant program, one of the years that we put out the application request, we didn't get many applications back, and we realized that the wording we were using didn't really translate to everyone the way we wanted it to. What really is a natural resource issue? What type of conservation practices benefit water quality? So we had to reevaluate our communication style and how to get the most applications from people who could really utilize this money, and to find that middle ground. So moving forward, some things NRCS is working on, at least I can speak for us here locally. We're trying to gather information, dollar amounts, on how to change our payment rates for some of those practices that don't scale down, some of the smaller size operations, things like I mentioned cover crop earlier, so that we can have financial incentive options for smaller farms that make it worth their time to work with us on those things, so we can better support them. We're also working on developing new practice scenarios. So something like pest management, which we've always had in our EQIP options, but what are the pest issues we're seeing in these locations, and what does management of those pests really look like? It's not going to be similar to traditional ag. A lot of these farms make their own compost on site and utilize it there. So it would be nice to come up with a practice scenario, financial incentive that help them to do that. Encourage them to do that. We're working on written technical information in different languages, see what our community needs are, and then translate some of our existing technical information or write new written materials to distribute. NRCS is doing regional offices now. I think they just decided Portland was going to be the Western regional location for an urban ag office. And then I'm not sure how many of you saw, there was an announcement where USDA is seeking members for a new advisory committee on urban ag, the 12-person committee to advise the Secretary of Agriculture. So on a national scale, they're looking at new ways to influence our programs and the way that we operate. So just wrapping up, things that some of our partners can do to support NRCS programs. Always, you can provide recommendations, like I mentioned before. What are realistic costs so that we can adjust our payment rates? What are some of the conservation practices people are using and that are successfully using that we could incorporate into programs like EQIP? There's always the option for coordinating with NRCS on outreach, finding those alternative funding sources for conservation practices, or even the non-conservation related needs like equipment or different types of support that don't fall under that natural resource umbrella. And again, providing technical assistance to farmers when NRCS doesn't have the staff capabilities in-house to do that. I think in general, just kind of reflecting on my experiences with urban ag in the past 8-9 years or so, it's been pretty surprising that how little things can really make a big difference. At one of the workshops or one of the meetings I went to, someone suggested we have a central location for equipment so that they could share different things. You know, sometimes even a couple extra shovels make a difference in someone's functionality as a farm, and just giving people an opportunity to have access to things that they might not need all the time, but would make a big difference for them. We need to have more options for quick support that don't fall under this government timeline type of criteria. And most importantly, to continue to build these authentic relationships with people so that they know who we are and what kind of support we can offer, but more importantly, that we see what's going on in our communities and can adjust our programs to more realistically and appropriately support what's happening and supporting people's efforts. That's all. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Darcey. I'm the district manager for Prince George's Soil Conservation District in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. I'm joined today with Kim Rush Lynch. She is our urban ag conservation planner at the Soil Conservation District. We're so happy to be here today and share with you our story of how we created a new program in our district called our Urban Ag Conservation Program. Next slide, please. So when we give presentations, we like to always give a little background and some statistics about our county. You can see in the map there, Prince George's County, we border the nation's capital. We're only 30 some miles from Baltimore. So we have a pretty big population in the county. Over 914,000 residents in our county on 319,000 acres. Prince George's County is ranked in top 100 wealthiest jurisdictions in the nation, but that's not to say we don't have some issues and challenges to deal with in our urban ag community. Our county is home to 7 colleges, universities, and over 15 federal agencies, as you would expect, being so close to the nation's capital. Our county is primarily urbanized now, but we still maintain about 60,000 acres of traditional agricultural land, and over 70% of that is privately owned. Efforts in the last few years, I give a lot of credit to Kim and our local legislators. We now can have zoning in our county for 79% of the county where we can do urban farming. Next slide, please. So why urban agriculture? Well, a few years ago, back in 2008, 2009, the county looked at the trend in urban agriculture, this growing industry, and they put out a great publication about urban agriculture in Prince George's County. So we started looking at this as an opportunity to start working with a population that we traditionally had not worked with before. And we focused in on 4 aspects of our program. One was improving health and quality of life. Even prior to COVID-19, many of our communities are struggling with food insecurities, chronic disease like obesity and high blood pressure, diabetes, and in many situations, limited opportunities for any outdoor recreation. Over 125,000 of our residents are food insecure. And believe it or not, in a wealthy county, we still have many grocery stores that lack high quality, healthy food options for our residents. And inside the Beltway, our county has Interstate 95, runs right through our county, goes around Washington, D.C. 55% of all the food retails in the Inner Beltway are fast food or, unhealthy options. And some 12% of our residents participate in the SNAP program. The second factor that we looked at why we wanted to start reaching out and working with the urban ag community was, of course, as a soil and water conservation district, to improve the environment. We have three major rivers in our county: the Potomac, the Anacostia, and the Patuxent rivers. They're all major tributaries to the Chesapeake Bay, and all of these bodies of water and many of our smaller streams in the county have some level of impairment. Prince George's County is blessed with really nice coastal plain soils, highly productive, can pretty much raise any crop, but they're all greater than 80% of our soils in the county are highly erodible soils. So they need special attention to keep them from eroding and to be remain productive. And in many of our soils in our urban ag communities have some level of contamination, whether it be heavy metals or PCBs. So that's a concern. Next slide, please. Our third factor we wanted to look at was education and outreach. Part of our overall mission as a soil and water conservation district is outreach and education. We're very much involved with Envirothon. We're also very much involved with our public school system. We participate in their Environment, Agriculture, Natural Resource Program Advisory Committee. We also advise to the Green School Initiative, and we also are members in the Blooming PGC Urban Farm Initiative that Kim will talk about a little later in the presentation. So our fourth and final factor we are very interested in, of course, is providing economic development opportunities within the county. As I mentioned, we border Washington, D.C., and we're only 30 miles southwest of Baltimore. In that corridor, it's estimated $26 billion is spent on food, and only 2% of that is locally raised. So we see a great potential for economic development within that corridor in our county. Next slide, please. So of course, you know, no program is successful without policy, and I'll let Kim take over that section of the presentation.
Thank you, Steve. So there's actually been a series of pieces of legislation to help expand urban farm opportunities in Prince George's County. In 2013, there was a smaller piece of legislation that allowed urban farming in a very specific zones, and it wasn't a very expansive definition, but it did allow a few smaller urban farms to exist. Fast forward in 2015, there was an urban ag property tax credit, and I'll talk about that in just a second. In 2016, we launched the Blooming PGC Urban Farm Initiative with partners such as University of Maryland Extension, Eco City Farms, and our Prince George's Food Equity Council. And in that particular piece of legislation, we came together, us county stakeholders, as well as our county council, to expand urban farming in more residential zones. And it allowed for the cultivation of fruits, vegetables, herbs, and cut flowers. But we did miss a few things, but mainly because we were trying to get county council very comfortable with the idea. So then fast forward to 2019, we had an expanded version that also provided urban farms, or allowed urban farms in more residential zones, commercial zones, and industrial zones. It also included rooftop farming and controlled environmental ag, such as aquaponics and hydroponics. So this expanded definition really opened up urban farming in the county. And as a result, 79% of Prince George's County is now zoned for urban farming. I just want to share that quick slide. And you can see here all of our different zones, and really only the white areas are where urban farming is not allowed. And some of that land is actually state-owned or federal-owned properties. So I wanted to back up to the urban ag property tax credit. In 2015, there was a council member who was really excited about urban agriculture, and she wanted to incentivize urban farmers to start and to grow food on their property or maybe on the property of another landowner. So she wanted to introduce this tax credit One had been already done in Baltimore, and she really wanted to bring it to Prince George's County. So this passed in 2015. It was fantastic for up to $5,000 per property. Of course, there was a $100,000 cap for the program that could be lifted as more farmers took advantage of the program. They had to gross $2,500 of product. This also triggered a nutrient management plan, of course. The property must be between 1/8 of an acre and 5 acres and located in Maryland's priority funding area. And finally, the Soil Conservation District was listed as the agency that would help to certify the growing area for the property tax credit. So this was really important because this is how the Soil Conservation District really got involved in urban ag initially. And of course, once this passed, I think I'd mentioned before, the expanded legislation didn't come until 2016, but this was used as a way to get our county council members really excited about the idea of urban ag, so that when we came back in 2016 with requests to expand the existing urban farm legislation, it would be very well received, and it was. So now I'm going to turn it back to Steve, who's going to tell you a little bit about our Urban Agriculture Conservation Grant, thanks to NACD.
Thanks, Kim. So you start to see the picture. It's very important to be involved with your local legislation. And when they named us as the go-to agency for the tax credit for urban agriculture, little bells started going off and whistles and said, hey, you know what? Here's an opportunity for us to expand our program. Problem is, we didn't have enough staff to expand our program because we were already pretty jammed up with the programs that we had at the time. So we then found out about NACD's Urban Ag Conservation Grants. And in the second round, we put in for that grant, and we were very fortunate to be awarded a $50,000 grant for capacity building. I had attended the NACD meetings the year before and listened to many presentations of the first round of recipients. And we wanted to do something just a little different with our grant if we were to get it. And that is to try to build a full program and not just address one property or one area of the county. So we set some goals. In our grant goals, of course, we fashioned it after what we felt comfortable with, what we understood, and that's soil and water conservation planning. So, in implementing best management practices, providing outreach and education, of course, to promote conservation of soil and water resources. We also knew that we were going to need to provide guidance to urban ag producers on soil testing, both in fertility and heavy metals, other contaminants. We realized that we were going to have to provide advice on permitting in the county, zoning, utility locations. We have a lot of utilities in Prince George's County, both underground and overhead. Provide training and also assist with EQIP applications or any other cost share program that might be available. Next slide, please. So when we were awarded the grant in 2017, we hired a retired district conservationist, Mr. Larry Holmes, who had worked in our county for several years prior and was really in tune with the urban ag movement and, of course, conservation as a retired district conservationist. So we hired him under contract for 1 year. And during that year, and at this time, Kim, I would say, I have to note, she was our county ag marketer. So she also had her inroads into the urban ag community. She had her pulse, had her thumb on the pulse of what was happening in the community. So the two of them worked together very well. And you can see they did 96 property visits in 1 year. We signed 12 new urban ag cooperators, developed 12 soil conservation water quality plans, and processed 4 EQIP, that's Environmental Quality Incentive Program through USDA, applications for high tunnels. They also developed producer profiles. We provided support for EcoCity Farms and the University of Maryland Extension for urban farmer training. The other unique aspect of this was, as we went forward in our grant and accomplishments, we were actually contacted by NRCS Maryland to see if we would be interested in a 3-year Urban Ag Conservation Contribution Agreement, meaning that certain deliverables were set into the agreement, like a plan or a workshop, and we actually can bill for that. So now we have a 3-year agreement. We have a potential of bringing in $60,000 into that program. We also worked very closely with our legislative body, which is the county council. We worked with the exec's office, executive branch of our local government, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning, our Department of Permits, Inspections, and Enforcement, and also our Prince George's County Food Equity Council, working on overlay easement issues and permitting issues. One of the other accomplishments that I was really intrigued by, as we talked about looking at heavy metals in soils, there again, we partnered with NRCS. They had purchased an X-ray fluorescent analyzer for heavy metals. So in that picture there, I'm assisting Valerie Cohen, who is an NRCS soil scientist. And that little gadget looks like a phaser out of Star Trek. You actually put that over a mound of soil, and it'll give you live feedback of what soils are in that soil profile. So as we move forward, you know, that helps us identify contaminated soils, and if we need to do raised beds, or if it's safe to plant in the existing soil there. And we're hoping to, as time moves forward, to map certain areas of the county for these heavy metals. So I thought that was really interesting, and it provides us some really good detailed information on what's in the soils in these urban areas. Next slide, please. Part of the accomplishments also were identifying key challenges in this new setting of cooperators and producers that you know, we had limited work with. And I would like to add the two gentlemen to the right in the picture. The gentleman on the left, that's Joseph Hamid, and the gentleman on the right, that's Larry Holmes. Both of those guys worked in our county as our district conservationists for many years. They both have a passion for conservation and urban ag. So it was really, I don't want to say easy to do this program, but those gentlemen were a big help in getting our program off the ground and working us through the grant. But some of the key challenges, the number one is land access. None of our producers, urban ag producers, maybe one or two, actually own their own property. They're, most of the producers are in need of finding land to lease. Location of underground overhead utilities, stormwater management, things I've mentioned before, and then also neighborhood perception. Site aesthetics, you know, plastic and hoop houses and the look of a typical urban farm. There are some neighborhoods that are not fond of that. Other neighborhoods are fine with it. And then lack of irrigation water. That is another major challenge in urban ag arena. And then there's legislation right now. Chickens are not allowed in any of our urban ag zones, especially no roosters. But we're working on that to see if we can change the perception of the issue of no chickens in the urban ag zones. Next. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Kim. That's kind of an overview of our grant process, and that grant helped us to come up with a brand new section in our district, and we were very fortunate to be able to hire Kim, recruit her from her job as the county ag marketer, and now she's running our urban ag conservation program. We're very blessed to have her. So back over to you, Kim.
Thanks, Steve. So I just wanted to touch on really quickly some of the services that we provide to urban farms in the county. Of course, conservation planning is a big part of that. Also helping them identify soils, and even more importantly, in some cases, teaching them how to test their soils. And usually we provide their first test for them in terms of, pulling the samples. The other thing is working with them on best management practice design and helping them figure out how to implement some of those. Zoning and permitting navigation is huge. There's a lot of questions about what folks can and cannot do. So I spend a lot of time on in-person visits, prior to COVID, some still, during COVID, but a lot of Zoom calls talking about their specific piece of property and running through that with them. The property tax credit certification we already mentioned. And also, I'm really big on trying to connect urban farmers with mentoring and training opportunities and also funding opportunities. So I have a Google group that I frequently share information on for our urban farmers. And finally, we're connecting them to the county rain check rebate program, as well as the Nrcs financial incentive programs. These are just some of the conservation practices that we use in our program. There's some other ones, but these are the main ones. Of course, they're on a much smaller scale, but there's still a lot that you can do on a tiny parcel that's intensively grown. Now I want to get into an urban farm case study that we recently worked through this year in terms of creating a high tunnel system agreement with Prince George's County. So going back to our legislation earlier, I think I mentioned that, urban farming was approved in many of the zones in the county. Unfortunately, we forgot collectively about some of the overlay zones. And one of our urban farmers, Doug Adams with New Brooklyn Farms, unfortunately was in the Hyattsville Arts District, which was an overlay zone. So he applied for his EQIP contract and he was awarded a contract, but then we found out that his particular zone, while the base zone approved of it, the overlay didn't. So we had to quickly gather our stakeholders and work with county council members to pass 2 resolutions so that urban farming was allowed in those specific overlay zones. So here's just a picture of Doug's urban farm in Mount Rainier prior to the high tunnel system. That's on the left. He also has a location in Hyattsville on the right. He grows a variety of herbs and even greens for Maryland Mead Works and some other, local businesses. And he also is going to be growing apples for a local distillery in Hyattsville. He splits his time between New York and Maryland. So he employs a farmer in residence program. So he frequently has other urban farmers that are growing their own product on his property as well. And above, that's just a picture of Doug and some of our county advocates, supporting the urban farm resolution and being able to just testify as to why it's so important to allow it in those particular overlay zones. So now I'm going to kick it back to Steve so he can tell you a little bit more about the process that we went through with our Department of Permitting, Inspections, and Enforcement.
Okay, so in Prince George's County, you pretty much need a permit for everything if you're in a residential zone. Even if you want to put up a pergola. Is that what they're called, pergola? Anything that's a structure, you pretty much need a permit for. So we went to our friends at Department of Permitting, Inspection, and Enforcement and said, hey, look, we have these high tunnel systems that we're encouraging urban ag conservation and production in the county, gave them the whole thing about health and environment and outreach and education, and especially economic development. In our county, economic development is a major driver. So we had several meetings and we came up with a memorandum of understanding, and based on one national law that says in the building code something to do with nurseries, you're exempt from getting a building permit. So our agreement with them was if the landowner worked directly with Nrcs and Nrcs oversaw the implementation, construction of the high tunnel, the landowner would be bound to NRCS's implementation requirements and certification, and also agree by signature on a piece of paper that they would maintain it and operate it per NRCS operation maintenance plan. But most importantly, they agreed to adhere to all Prince George's County housing property standards. And that was a big thing that the county government, they really wanted to see that because of, issues within the urban view shed and, neighbors and things like that. So next slide, please. One of the other things we agreed to do was provide them with a modified site plan. If you ever have to get a permit in a residential zone, you have to get grading permit, you have to get stormwater management permits, you have to get concept plans. A lot of engineering and studies go into this building with a building permit. And the other thing you have to get is a site plan. You can easily spend $20,000 to $30,000 on a small lot just to get a building permit. So we were very happy that they were agreeable to a modified site plan. So this is an example of that. This is not Mr. Adams, but you'll see it has the zone, it has the different slopes, it has contours, it has different easements, and also has environmental features, shows property lines, utility soils, wetlands, topography. And so that complete package, we send that up, and then Department of Public Permits, they put that on file. If there's any complaints or problems, they have that file, official file to go back to. Next. And that is a picture of the finished high tunnel. You'll notice the previous picture, you saw those metal raised beds. Now they're covered. And Mr. Adams is in the middle of the picture, very happy. And our NRCS SoilCon is on the right, and two gentlemen that helped install the high tunnel. So far that has been a good case study, and we hope to have more of those throughout the county. So now I'll turn it back over to Kim to talk about outreach and education.
So one of the things that we've noticed is that our urban farm population needs a little bit more hand-holding. A lot of them are, they're great gardeners. A lot of them are even master gardeners. Some of them may have farmed a little bit, but for most of them, they're starting a new enterprise and a new skill set altogether. So we decided to create a couple of programs just to help support them with skill building, networking, and sharing of ideas. As I mentioned earlier, we started the Blooming PGC Urban Farm Initiative with our stakeholders. And one of the pieces of that was creating an online site, essentially, to have a landing page for a lot of the aspects that involve urban farming. So that's actually housed on an extension website, and that's the bloomingpgc.com. And then, of course, we have additional resources on our urban ag conservation site. That's part of the district's webpage. Another thing that we started were quarterly workshops. We had our first inaugural one in February, right before the pandemic hit, and that was on winter sowing. And we used one of our urban farmers who also is a master gardener, and she's done a lot of education work, and she did a whole workshop on winter sowing for a lot of the growers in the county, urban farmers, and also just, really interested gardeners. So that's just a shot of a couple of scenes from that. We also did another one virtually this summer, and that was on fall planning essentials for urban farms. And finally, something that we started this fall were open mic nights, and that's just an opportunity for urban farmers to come together, talk about their farms and what they're doing, share resources, talk about challenges, blow off some steam, and just really give them an opportunity to connect, as well as give us an opportunity to listen and really, hear what some of the challenges are so we can think about addressing those. I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that are on the horizon. We mentioned earlier our partnership with EcoCity Farms. They have two farms, one in Bladensburg and one in Edmonston, Maryland. And they run a beginning farmer training program. And the Soil Conservation District has provided some training for that in the past. This year, we were going to do more conservation planning, on the boots kind of conservation planning on the farm with our participants, but unfortunately with the pandemic, that didn't happen. So that's scheduled again for this year. We did more introductory kind of work. But one exciting thing that we did was work on a soil health badge for their participants. So ECO has a partnership with the Prince George's Community College, and folks can participate in that program and they get a certificate in commercial urban agriculture. So we were really excited to work on that soil health badge that participants will be receiving and to, figure out what those metrics would look like. The other project we're working on with Eco City Farms, as well as some other partners, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning and our Food Equity Council, and even Extension, is our Urban Farm Incubator. And I'm going to turn it back to Steve so he can tell you a little bit about the parcel that we're using and some other aspects of this project.
Thank you, Kim. This is really exciting. The incubator farm project is going to be located at Watkins Regional Park, centrally located in our county. This park has 1 million visitors a year. Now the park is some agricultural land, and then you can see there north of the fields, there's a lot of woodlands and trails and things like that. South of the project, you can see there's subdivision, and then just east of the project is a large mega church, and there's a major road that runs right by the field where you see the red star. That's where the incubator project's going to be. So we're really hopeful we'll get a lot of publicity out of this. Maybe use this as a national model. Next slide, please. Use this as a national model of how to do an incubator farm and educate urban ag producers. So our first task as soil conservation was to survey the site, come up with a draft site plan of how to handle the water. So this is our draft plan showing a grass waterway down through the middle. Land flow goes right to left. Diversion at the bottom to take that water around an existing community garden. And then there'll be a series of grass buffers on the contour separating each leased piece of land for the urban producer. And then where you see the 4 squares, that's going to be an area for accessory buildings, a compost facility, perhaps a vegetable washing station, things like that. So we're very excited about that. Hopefully in a couple of years, we'll come back to NACD and give you guys a report on how successful that project has been. Next slide. So in closing, we can't work in a vacuum. Things like building new programs and reaching out to citizens and residents of the county takes teamwork and partnerships. And this is a list of many of the folks that have supported us, both financially and with staff, and just, it's just been a great effort on everybody's part. And we want to thank all of our partners and supporters. And next slide. If you have questions or concerns or want information, here's our contact, our headquarters. And of course, always go to our website, and we would be glad to share our information with other folks interested in this type of program. So thank you for your time.
My name is Van Slack. I'm the Ag Resource Specialist with the Soil and Water Conservation District.
And I'm Melissa Devore, the Ag Tech at Muskingum Soil and Water.
Our interns from last year, the year of COVID, graciously put this presentation together for your enjoyment.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben Phillips, and this presentation is Urban Greens, how it was built and the benefits it provides. Today this will be presented by myself, Ben Phillips, and Allie Murphy. We were interns during the 2020 season for the Muskegon County Soil and Water Conservation District. So the first question is, what is Urban Greens? And Urban Greens can be summed up in 4 points. In 2016, the Muskegon County Soil and Water Conservation District applied for a grant from NACD, in order to provide urban agricultural efforts in the Putnam area of Muskingum County, which is a disadvantaged area and a food desert. So, upon receiving the grant, Urban Greens was created not only to provide fresh produce to those living in the area, but to provide education on agricultural efforts so that that area may begin to grow its own produce. And so by providing these opportunities, we hoped to grow the community and bring them closer, as well as provide fresh produce. And this was all started based on asset-based community development, which is an idea from Jessica Stonecipher, who is one of the founders of Urban Greens. So, again, in 2016, Muskingum County Soil and Water Conservation District applied for the grant from NACD, and it identified Putnam as a food desert. There is no grocery stores that you can find fresh produce at within 5 miles of this district, so it is very hard to get healthy food anywhere in that area. And so in order to tackle this problem, they implemented a plan to create gardens within that area on lesser used plots of land. And so in order to implement this plan, you would need a candidate that has urban agricultural experience, as well as the ability to work with different organizations. And so after receiving the grant, Urban Greens was put into action, and it began to progress to what it is today. And so the first 2 people hired for Urban Greens were Kristen Boffman and Jessica Stonecipher. Kristen had lots of urban agricultural experience, and Jessica Stonecipher was more on the community development side, with close ties with the community and the ability to bring organizations together. And so in order to start Urban Greens, they needed to identify areas that they could start growing these gardens in. And so a very important part was connecting with local businesses and organizations that would help them in this process. And so they identified areas that they could use, and a large part of the process was talking to people in the community that could possibly help them using asset-based community development. And so upon talking to people, they began to get more and more leads and more resources, and the momentum for Urban Greens really started. And so implementing their plan, they began to find success, and Urban Greens continued to progress. So a big part of Urban Greens, again, is to provide fresh produce to the community. But in order to really help the community, you need to gain awareness. And so part of Jessica and Kristen's plan was to gain awareness by hosting lots of events in the community that would bring people from all walks of life together to participate in Urban Greens and gain awareness. And so the events that they hosted weren't necessarily all about agricultural experiences and gardening. Some of it was just movie nights and getting to know people in your community. But they planned to raise awareness for this, and so that people would feel a connection to the gardens that they were initiating, and would want to help out in the future and help progress their area and feel a sense of ownership over it. And so they did, again, a number of events, most notably gardening events, lots of movie nights, instruction on how to start your own garden. And then they even did seed and plant giveaways, which would allow members of the community to start their own gardens, for free, which really kickstarted the agricultural movement in the community. And then Urban Greens continued to grow with guidance from Kristen and Jessica. And then the community continued to hear more and more about them, and Putnam began to really get behind Urban Greens. So a very important part of Urban Greens is asset-based community development. And this is a really unique idea because you may not have heard of this before, but this is actually an idea from Jessica Stonecipher. She told me that she learned this in graduate school. And the idea is that you use assets in your community that already exist to help build up your program. There's no point of bringing in outside resources and working on things in your community that are not really supported by it, because usually those projects will wither away and die, because if the community doesn't support it and it's for them, then it just doesn't make sense. So asset-based community development identifies people, businesses, any organizations in that community that can be beneficial, and it uses them and the resources they provide to, build up and work on projects. Because, what's better to help a community than the community itself? And oftentimes they told me that you'd be surprised, what people can offer. It could just be one person, offering their time in the garden, or, a business offering, for example, potting soil that they can no longer use to the gardens. You never really know where the resources are going to come from, but with collaboration, the gardens were able to be successful early because of the movement that Urban Greens started. And so as they went along, they gained many partners, and just talking to people in the community, they were able to learn a lot really about the Putnam area and what initiatives they should take. So up next, I have Jessica Stonecipher here to explain a little more about asset-based community development.
Okay, so asset-based community development is something that I stumbled upon when I was in graduate school. And it's basically a way of going about community development by utilizing resources that are already present in the community. And that way, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel or try to bring in outside resources, you're already engaging the hopes and dreams of the people that are already present. So you get more buy-in that way, which I think it did help us quite a bit with getting people rallied around the project. I'm trying to think what else I could share with you about asset-based community development. One of the things that people do usually is create an asset map. And so in Putnam and even in Zanesville, Muskegon County, I spent some time looking around and seeing what was around us. And that took a while, a few months. What was available, what kind of expertise was out there, even just like neighborhood folks who were interested. And so an asset is could be almost anything, like a building, a person who knows something, a person who is passionate, people that have things to donate, people that had land, that kind of thing. So I worked really hard, and Kristen was really great about it too, finding people locally who would help us do the work.
Hi, I'm Allie Murphy, and I am the other Urban Greens intern for the summer of 2020. In this photo, you see Ben and I here at the Brighton Garden. So we're going to be discussing how Urban Greens developed from its beginning in 2016 up until the most recent season of 2020. It all began in the summer of 2016 when Kristen Boffman and Jessica Stonecipher were able to implement their idea of creating urban agriculture in the Putnam area. They did this by using asset-based community development, which means that they identified people, land, materials, and other sources of funding in the community. They also formed partnerships, some of which including the City of Zanesville, Zanesville City Schools, the New Putnam Project, and the Food Work Alliance. By creating community connections and partnerships early on, Urban Greens has been able to utilize these partnerships throughout the last few years, and they've also continued to obtain new community partners as well. Another focus of Urban Greens was finding sites in the Putnam area for their gardens, which was challenging due to the specific needs of each garden. So they used asset-based mapping to assist in finding garden sites as well. In the spring of 2017, Urban Greens created their first gardens at the First United Methodist Church, the Zanesville Community High School, the Restoration Park, and they also expanded a garden at the Bethel Community Center. They also made 48 raised beds, which were constructed by community volunteers, and the supplies were donated from community partners. They held some community events such as the Putnam Garden Tour, the Harvest Block Party, and Movie Night, among a few other events, and those were all very successful. Some even attracted over 100 participants. Now you'll notice I said movie night. Not all of these events were garden focused, but they were mostly aimed to promote community engagement. With help from the volunteers, the gardens were pretty productive in their first year. There were some challenges though, some of which being the growing conditions. We had groundhog problems at a few of the gardens, and wildlife eating the produce was also a problem. Although they did face some challenges in this year, they were able to donate 75 pounds of produce to Zanesville City Schools. In 2018, Urban Greens continued their efforts in the Putnam area. They gained new partners such as Zanesville City Schools, the Summer Lunch Program. This program provides lunch for children living in the Zanesville City School District. It's provided at no cost, and there are various locations throughout the school district. The 2018 Urban Greens intern, Lauren Williams, went to 18 of these school lunch sites and gave presentations on healthy eating and the importance of gardening. So that promoted another goal of Urban Greens, which was to include and educate community members. They also partnered with the OSU extension of Muskingum County to create the Kids Dig It program. The Kids Dig It program used the Zanesville Community School Garden, and it taught children skills about gardening. And the Zanesville Master Gardeners actually volunteered over 90 hours to the Kids Dig It program, and they taught them gardening skills and techniques. Now, the kids that participated in the Kids Dig It were from different summer youth programs, some of which being the Life Well and the Civic League, where 10 to 20 members from those organizations participated in Kids Dig It. Over the course of the summer of 2018, over 250 individuals participated in Urban Greens events, and over 300 pounds of produce was grown and distributed to various organizations in the community. So as you see, there's already a huge progress from 2017 to 2018 in the amount of participation and produce grown at these gardens. Now in 2019, they yet again continued to obtain new community partners. The Heart of Ohio Girl Scout Council, the Shelley Company's Wildlife Preserve, and the Muskegon County Veterans Clinic are some of these. They also acquired the management over the Brighton Garden. This garden became the largest garden under Urban Greens management. It was planted by Urban Greens, but also the Muskegon County Veterans Clinic, where the produce was then given to veterans and their families, and some extra was given to the Zanesville Lunch Program. Over 150 families received free garden seed and plants in 2019 through the Plant and Seed Giveaway, which was partnered with the Brighton Presbyterian Church. The Zanesville High School garden produced 150 pounds of food that was donated to the Summer Lunch Program, and more workshops and summer events continued, some of them including the Selection, Care, and Use of Hand Tools workshop, the Grocery Store Garden workshop, and the Food Preservation workshop. Some of the events that they did were the Workday / Community Garden Opening event, the Plant and Seed Giveaway, and a Harvest Block Party. So as you all know, 2020 posed many challenges to different individuals and organizations, and Urban Greens is no different. The COVID-19 pandemic forced us to change the way that we operated this year, and that means that we had to postpone or cancel many of our community events. Due to this, we had a new focus, which was entirely on the gardens. We spent much more time each week in the gardens, and we were able to come up with new ideas on different growing methods and improvements to the gardens. Due to this new focus, we were able to harvest over 900 pounds of produce, and all of that was donated to community organizations such as the Veterans Clinic, the Christ Table Food Pantry, the Salvation Army, and many more. We were able to try out some new methods of gardening, so those include putting up the fencing and mulch in the Brighton Garden, as you can see in the photo, and we also put down the black tarps, which hopefully will improve the growing for next season. The Brighton Garden specifically has a lack of shade, and therefore it's really hard to grow some of the things that we planted, and hopefully this can help the soils stay nutrient rich and prevent weed growth. Another technique that we did at the Brighton Garden were the Three Sisters gardening technique, where we planted corn, squash, and beans in a mound, and they were supposed to help each other grow together. We also implemented the Florida weave method to stake tomatoes. So along with focusing on the garden, Urban Greens was able to work with the Muskingum County Soil and Water Conservation District and their native pollinator plants. So what we did was we started out at the McDonald's greenhouse, which is a local family in the community. They have a greenhouse at their farm. And we had plant plugs that we then transferred into plots. And then we sold them in groups for the native pollinator plant sale for the Conservation District. And we also planted them at some of our gardens, at the Conservation District's office, and at the Shelley and Sands Dresden Wildlife Site. In this last segment, we're going to talk about how Urban Greens accomplished its original goals in eliminating the food desert in the Putnam area and providing fresh produce to the area. Along with accomplishing the original goals of the grant, the Putnam community experienced an increase in unity as a result of Urban Greens. And lastly, by using key features of Urban Greens, programs similar to this can be replicated in different communities around the United States. Through the NACD grant, Urban Greens created 3,350 square feet of new growing space in Muskegon County within the first year. Within this space, we donate hundreds of pounds of produce annually to the Putnam area, and this creates opportunities for healthy eating and education in an area that's historically lacking of the two. Along with the Putnam area, a wide range of organizations have benefited from Urban Greens and the produce that's being donated. These individuals range from youth to veterans and the homeless population in Putnam. Urban Greens' impact has been felt throughout Muskingum County, and 4 additional gardens were started in the county, while others were expanded and improved with the help from Urban Greens. Ample growing space is the most important aspect of Urban Greens' success, because without the places to grow produce and congregate, there would be very minimal participation in the Urban Greens projects. By creating so much available space, Kristen and Jessica gave themselves and the community a good foundation to build on. The produce is also an important aspect of Urban Greens, so therefore it's critical that the gardens are successful from year to year in order to continue saturating the Putnam area with fresh food. By producing a large quantity of fruits and vegetables each year, Urban Greens made sure that the Putnam community developed habits of healthy eating over the last couple of years. So as you see, not only Putnam was impacted, but the entire county of Muskingum County has been positively impacted, and this goes to show the impact that the Urban Greens program has had as a major resource for agricultural knowledge and allowing fresh produce to be produced in areas that weren't even considered in the original grant. So, as a result of the solutions to the problems that were considered in the original grant proposal, many benefits related to community unity and togetherness had also resulted. Urban Greens wasn't created for the purpose of community unity or togetherness, but as a result of the hard work done by Kristen and Jessica in the community, they were able to grow, and the neighbors were given the ability to interact with each other in a positive manner. In the first year, Urban Greens had 870 individuals participate in events, and hundreds more became involved in the Urban Greens in the ensuing years. Due to the non-discriminatory nature of gardening, people of all walks of life were able to participate in Urban Greens programs in the Putnam area, and it began to change the reputation as a disadvantaged community to something better. Families are common participants in Urban Greens, and this allows bonding to happen and intergenerational connectedness. Jessica Stonecipher summed up why Urban Greens brings people together perfectly by stating that people have been growing their own food for thousands of years, so naturally, gardening brings all kinds of people together. People interact with agriculture every day, whether they know it or not, through the food they eat or the actions they take. And by bringing together many kinds of people, a diverse range of knowledge is made available. Here's a clip of Ben's interview with Jessica Stonecipher and her reflection on Urban Greens.
What impact do you think Urban Greens had on the community whenever you were first starting it? I guess, like, what did you see that maybe would have changed?
A few things. So I think I saw people really engaged in their own food system and in their health, and in their neighborhood in ways that they hadn't been before. I saw people step out of their comfort zones and try new things, which was really cool to see, because they would always say, "Oh, I've never done this," or like they would be nervous about making a mistake. And community gardens, like it shouldn't be a thing. We should be able to just allow people to try. I think that we were able to show the community that people can come together over a common goal. That's a really hard message to get across to people right now. And I think we were able to show that, and there was a lot of energy around that. You know, people of all backgrounds, socioeconomic status, different people of different races, people of different generations were coming together and just having a lot of fun and feeling a sense of purpose together. I think those are the three main things that came out of it for me.
So now we're going to talk about how Urban Greens can be replicated. It can be replicated by using some of the different features that Urban Greens did. So one of which is being asset-based community development. Asset-based development can be used in any community and is often very effective at unifying the members. A successful program is created by building from within and using internal resources that tend to strengthen communities rather than external resources that often don't take root due to the lack of local support. This allows the members to develop a sense of self-accomplishment, which leads to a successful program. The next thing Urban Greens did was applied for grants. Without grants, Urban Greens would not be the program that it is today. And initial funding is a necessity for programs like this to develop. In order to raise money through grants, a specific goal is needed in order to receive most grants. The more specific and detailed the outline of the project is, the more likely you are to be awarded the grant you're applying for. The initial funding for Urban Greens was awarded due to the intricate grant proposal and specific goals for the program. Due to this, we've continued to grow and be awarded more funding after our success in the past few years. A major part of successful urban agriculture is to have someone with experience and knowledge, and they can help grow the program from the very beginning, and that's what Jessica and Kristen did. Lastly, every person has something to offer and must be viewed as an asset. By drawing upon these assets, communities can create successful gardens. So lastly, we would like to give a special thanks to Kristen Boffman and Jessica Stonecipher, as well as the Muskingum County Soil and Water Conservation District, and their continued support of Urban Greens and urban agriculture in Muskingum County. We would also like to thank all of Urban Greens' past, present, and future partners who have made all of this possible. Thank you for listening, and I hope similar programs can be replicated in other urban areas to create a sense of community and unification, just as it has here in Muskingum County. Thank you.
In conclusion, I just wanted to thank NACD and the grant process for the opportunity. It's been a great asset for the city of Zanesville, for the Muskingum County, and for the Soil and Water District. It's given us a lot of opportunities, and it's basically still in its infancy. We find new opportunities every year, and it also gives us an opportunity to have an intern program during the summer months. So, and just wanted to thank Ben and Allie for their work on the video, and our coworker Ashley Kopchak also. So thank you.
All right, I am Ariel Rivers, and I serve as NACD's staff as the Pacific Region representative, while also supporting NACD's urban and community portfolio of projects. If you ever have any questions about any of our activities in these areas, please feel free to contact me at any time. So we would now like to have a panel discussion with our speakers to learn more about each of their programs. I will provide a question and ask each speaker to provide a brief answer. So first question, how does your urban agriculture conservation work differ from your work in other contexts, if at all? And what lessons might you be able to apply in those contexts?
I would say most of our work here, besides urban ag, we do a lot of work on rangeland, and it's a lot of work with individuals. The urban ag setting, the projects we do are so much more community oriented, as far as, you know, the work you're doing is directly impacting a much larger group of people. There's a much more of a humanitarian kind of aspect to it that I hadn't really experienced in my job beforehand. Obviously, we're always supporting our farmers and ranchers, but typically in our area, they're more underserved communities, disenfranchised community, lower income communities that have these urban farms in them. So there's a much different type of feeling you get knowing that you're supporting and you're contributing to those aspects of your community.
Thank you. Steve and Kim, do you have lessons?
Steve, I think you're muted.
Kevin will have to work his magic. Yes, we do have lots of lessons. One of the first things in urban ag is just the scale of the whole thing compared to working with commodity crop farmers and the livestock farmers. So as Ariel had talked about in her presentation, you know, how do you take the EQIP programs and the BMPs that, you know, we generally measure by acres and bring that down to square footage and make it, you know, acceptable and usable for the urban ag producer. A lot of one-on-one contact, especially with zoning issues and permitting issues. It seems like every week Kim and I are trying to answer questions on those particular questions. And, you know, in residential zones, it triggers different permit issues than out in our rural community. And also, many of our urban producers, you know, they've never worked with a soil conservation district before. It's new to them. And so they always have a lot of questions about the different programs and support that, you know, your local soil conservation district and your state and federal and county partners can offer.
And I would just add, I would say compared to my colleagues that are just working in ag conservation and working with our more traditional rural crowd, I spend a lot more time, as Steve mentioned, you know, doing one-on-ones on aspects of urban farming that aren't necessarily related to conservation work. So, you know, connecting urban farmers with extension, you know, telling them about FSA and Nrcs, asking them if they have a business plan, for example. So there's all those other things that make an urban farm successful that you also need in addition to the conservation practices. So I spend a bit of time, doing that and making sure that they're getting the other resources they need so that they can have a great farm.
Dan?
Yeah, I just pretty much echo what the other folks have said. It's smaller scale. It's kind of like the NACD's program, backyard conservation, only from more of an ag standpoint or direct production standpoint. Our program, I think, in listening to those presentations, we have focused more on the community garden aspect and not necessarily the individual producer aspect. It is community based. There's a lot of additional benefits and relationships that come out of that. There's the social economic differences too from larger scale ag. And the other thing that hit me is that you're working with kind of produce versus a commodity, and something that's ready to eat versus needs some sort of processing. So you're almost closer to the consumer, whether it's just the individual consuming it or they have it up for sale too.
Perfect, thank you. So next question, what are some of the outcomes that you found surprising when you started doing this work, and how may those outcomes, those surprises, shifted your urban ag work going through time? Alyson?
I would say how unsuccessful we've been at applying EQIP to some of the farms. There's another Farm Bill program that some of you might be familiar with, which is CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. And it's a little bit different. It has the single annual payment for essentially the simple version is for good stuff people are already doing, plus maybe some new stuff they're willing to adopt. And the minimum payment is $1,500 a year. So we're going to try that on a small farm this year and see if that's helpful. It's a little bit less of that rigid standards and specs version, but also provides financial support for people who could really, I think, use it even at that amount. So coming from a type of day-to-day work where it's been really easy to fit Nrcs programs into what people are looking for and go through the process and hey, that sounds great, let's do this, here's your check, have a good day, high five, move on, call me in a couple of years if you have something else to do, versus I don't have the technical staff to do what you need. Oh, conservation isn't your priority? Okay, what does that mean? Oh, we have this program, but it doesn't really work, sorry. So that's been my biggest surprise. But along with that comes, all right, well, what do we do to fix that? Which is the stage we're at now. So it's definitely not hopeless by any stretch of the imagination. It's kind of just ramping up with, like I mentioned before, a lot of the different efforts of our agency. So I'm optimistic.
So in our situation, the biggest outcome that we were surprised is how much lack of land producers have available to them. On a small scale, a lot of the larger parcels of land aren't willing to lease small parcels to multiple people on their farm, and the lack of water. When we do have a place, there's no water. There's city water, there's plenty of water under the ground, but we can't get to it. A typical hookup from the local water authority is $25,000 or more. So those are areas we need to work on, and we are working on. The incubator farm is good. Kim's got some producers that are doing cut flowers on a 15-acre field that our Park Service traditionally had rented for commodity crop producers. So, our partners are working with us. And I think if we can finally get the attention that we need to the urgency and need, I think our water authority will come around and perhaps start providing some hookups for a minimal fee or even free. I'm sure Kim has some other things to add.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd like to add is that I'm kind of surprised more urban farmers haven't taken advantage of the property tax credit. So some of that is because, you know, they don't own their own property, but there are a fair amount that do that just haven't taken advantage of that yet. So that's something that we're going to have to drill down to a little bit more this year, because despite my repeated reminders about coming out and measuring their growing area, haven't gotten a whole lot. I've gotten the verbal, like, I'm really interested in this, but not the follow through. So let's see what happens there.
One of the observations that Melissa had made was how, at least in our case, it was multi-generational. A lot of grandparents and grandkids getting together, and sometimes, you know, the parents weren't involved, you know, for whatever reason. So that was kind of neat, and that's part of the relationship building, is giving people an opportunity. Partners, some of the partners surprised us. We have a Dollar General warehouse here in the county, and we've hauled multiple pickup truckloads of busted bags of topsoil out to be able to utilize in raised beds. We have a state correctional institute in a neighboring county that has a compost program. We're able to partner with them to get compost for the gardens. So you just never know where that help or assistance might come from. And then green space utilization. You know, I love the idea about the incubator there at the park there in Maryland. Our first community garden was actually installed in a park owned by the city of Zanesville. So you just never know.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Van, and brings us to our last question. Each of you have mentioned a variety of partners, policies, et cetera, that have enabled some of your work. But for others that may be considering an urban ag program, what recommendations might you have?
First thing I would say is to go out into your community and see what's needed. Whatever method you have to do that is ask them what's going on. Don't assume that you know what the solutions to any issues people might be facing really are. You know, go out, talk to people, send out surveys, whatever you need to do. The second thing I would say is to, if you can, have multiple staff people that you can guarantee they're going to be employed for a long time, because you know, going out once and talking to someone and then maybe checking back in with them in a few years doesn't always get the results that might be worth anyone's time. I think Kim really nailed it when she said some of the non-conservation related things. So I would say look into what options you have to support non-resource related issues, because they are just as important or more important than some of the things that, you know, our programs prioritize. And based on how many things I've scribbled down today as far as what other people are doing, I would say ask other counties and other states what they have done that has been successful, because there's so many ideas out there, and there's so many things people have tried. I just wrote jail compost down. I'm like, we have a big jail here. I wonder what they're doing. So, you know, you don't have to start from scratch every time, but reach out to folks, see what they're doing, and try it out in your area, see if it works.
I would echo everything that Alyson just said. And, you know, you really, soil conservation districts just have to think outside the box, and don't be afraid to address this new, maybe a new customer base out there, because people are really by nature really anxious to get information and help and help themselves. And also don't be shy in engaging your state and local elected officials, because they're there representing the people who put them in office. They want to help. So make your district the go-to agency for technical service and soil and water conservation, and you'll hit a home run. I guarantee it. You will not fail. But also, like Alyson said, conferences like this, partnering and asking questions of other soil conservation districts, how it worked. the sky is the limit, and there's so many things, more things that we want to do, but we're just limited on staff and time and funds. But you know, one step at a time, and it will continue to grow upon itself, which is the great thing about urban ag and conservation.
And I really have nothing else to add to what Steve and Alyson said, other than if you have an urban farmer who can, you know, be a voice for the work that you're doing at your conservation district, that also is extremely helpful and can help with, you know, doing some workshops and things of that nature, because as Steve and Alyson both mentioned, you know, with limited staff time, you still want the work to get done and the word to get out there and the message. So it's really helpful to have your urban farmers share their voice.
And I think when we discussed it, we talked about starting small, you know, don't discount any opportunities or relationships. You never know where they might lead. Do your research. I think Stephen might have mentioned about zoning. The city of Zanesville just had to go through a bunch of zoning changes to make it available to do urban agriculture. So depending on your community, that might be something there. You know, potential site, you know, are there land banks? Are there abandoned lots? Are there people just not doing anything with their land that they'd love to see something done with it? Finding community leadership, trying with limited staffing, trying to find those volunteers and stuff that can take the ball and run with it. And that's more of a community garden standpoint versus somebody that's trying to start a farm that's a business. And then finally, I guess something that the way I look at it is the old adage: if you feed a man a fish, you feed him for a lifetime. If you teach a man to fish, he can feed himself for a lifetime.
Excellent. Thank you for those words, Van. And this may be the only session in which we heard the term jail compost in NACD's entire annual meeting. So thank you to each of our speakers for their creativity, dedication, and knowledge related to urban and community conservation. And thank you also for taking the time today to share information about each of your programs. So as a reminder to our audience, we will find the bios of each of our speakers as well as their contact information in the chat box. And thank you to our attendees for joining us in this session. As a reminder, we have information about all of NACD's urban agriculture conservation grantees on our website, as well as additional information about our monthly urban and community webinars. And other opportunities to connect on these topics. So please feel free to contact anyone on NACD staff at any time with any questions. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.